Hello from the Toronto bunker. You're probably only going to be watching this after I put it up because I bollocksed up the live link because I've never done this before that I tweeted out about. So you're probably watching this after the fact, or you might have hung around and somehow found this live link. Good evening to you anyway. I'm Colin Barrett. I'm going to be reading a short extract from my novel that I turned into my publishers about 2 weeks before all this started to happen. So it's tentatively scheduled to be published next spring, but we'll see what happens. In the meantime, there's a lot of work still to be done with it, a lot of editing, but I have a finished draft. I'm going to be reading a little bit from it now that will hopefully still be in it as and when it comes out. I just want to say a big thanks to Simon and Roz Lewis, who are the couple who are behind this reading series, which is called The Holding Cell. My ambivalently worded tweet meant a couple of people thought my novel is titled The Holding Cell. My novel doesn't have a final title yet. So it's the reading series that's called The Holding Cell. So I'm just going to read a little bit from that without further ado. Overall, the book is about a kidnapping in a small town. This is just a very gentle scene in which not that much happens. It's from the perspective of a 17-year-old girl named Pell Munnelly. She's a character in it. She appeared briefly she was the main character in a story called The Ways that I wrote a few years ago. And she kind of came back to me as I was writing this book. That story isn't a part of the novel, but she's the same character or a version of that character. So she's 17. She's driving across County Mayo to visit, to drop in on her kind of pseudo boyfriend, best friend, Donal Dahl English. Everyone calls him Dahl for reasons that are explained in the novel. He lives with his mother, Sheila, and they're going out on a Friday night. They're teenagers going out on a Friday night, so it's just about that. Pell's one wish in life was that her piece of shit Golf would not give up the ghost before she turned 18. A cramped hatchback with a paint job that from a distance still looked fresh. The Golf was 20 years old, with a throaty old engine that sounded ready to disintegrate, but the ride could, with some coaxing, still move. She was blamming it out the Foxford Road to Ballina, a 10-mile stretch of more or less straight road that let her pick up as much speed as she thought the car could handle, touching 100 kilometers an hour now. The chassis squeezed low to the ground and the frame of the car jostling and squeaking madly around her in a way that always made Pell think of the lads that flew across the Atlantic in a plane made out of wood. She read somewhere they could see the ocean through the gaps in the floorboards. She was driving one-handedly, the heel of her palm, the only part of her hand touching the steering wheel. Atrocious technique and gallingly casual. But that's how her brother Nick drove, so that's how she drove. Not that he had taught her. She had just watched him for years. In one of her actual official driving lessons, she'd unthinkingly dropped her hands from the 10 and 2 position into this posture, and the instructor, an otherwise sound older guy with a pitted, meaty face and a moustache the color of brandy who smelled overpoweringly of the leather jacket he wore, lost it with her. Told her that was an awful way to try and drive. Did she think she was a boy racer? The rest of the time, the instructor was very nice and did this bit where he would tell Pell about the inexplicable things his daughters got up to, like she might be able to decode their behavior for him. Once Pell got the license, though, she reverted to the inherited sloppy form of her brother. With her free hand, she took a nip from the opened can of Coors Light resting between her thighs. She was not drink driving, only kindling the beginnings of a buzz, 1 teaspoon-sized sip every 5 minutes. The can is full and would still be nearly full by the time she got to the English house. The plan was to head to Dahl's, and from Dahl's, the two would walk into town to Mulligan's, the pub where everyone underage went to because they never carded anybody there. That's where they would meet Keith Cannon and his mates. Then the plan was to head back to Cannon's house. Cannon's parents were out of town, and his older sister Jessica was back from Scotland. She was having people over, and Cannon had wheedled the sister into letting him bring a few of his classmates along. Dala got the invite because he sold stuff to Cannon and his lads, and Pell got the invite because Pell came with Dal. That was the plan. Up ahead was the turn to Mount Falcon, an old country house that was now a hotel. Pell sometimes took the turn just for a spin around the grounds, and she did that now. The road into the house was narrow and unlit, winding through an unruly interval of crowding, spidery trees. The road extended on in this fashion, just long enough to make you doubt you were going the right way or anywhere at all before you broke into a clearing. Then you were following the long incline of a vast open lawn, the grass meticulous and metallic in the blue moonlight. At the summit of the lawn was the country house itself, dozens of windows warmly lit along its imposing stone breadth like an enormous docked ship. Pell spun up to the doors of the lobby, idled without cutting the engine like she was waiting to collect someone. There was a bar or restaurant off the lobby's left. Through the windows, she watched the waiters sidestep each other in the aisles between tables of mainly middle-aged couples, the men in jackets, the women in evening dresses. Even glimpsed from a distance, you could tell by the heads on them that these were people with money. The way they sat back in their chairs, patient to the point of indifference with their food, topping their wine glasses without watching the level of the bottle. When she was younger, her parents would sometimes take them to one of the local cafes with inside seating or a pub bar. Pell remembers her brothers, Nick and Jerry, crammed into the booth opposite hers, their heads bent low and elbows planted territorially either side of their plates, only occasionally grunting back if Pell or either of the parents tried to engage them in talk, the boys going at their food with steady mechanical ferocity, eating too relentlessly to be possibly relishing any of it. Pell had never set foot inside Mount Falcon. There was nothing stopping her going inside, but she never had. She did have this notion of going in one evening in the future after she'd left Mayo for good and could return home at least partially a stranger. She would go in and order things such as oysters, quail, and champagne, even though she would probably find oysters gross, and she would stay in a room with a big four-poster bed and a deep bathtub that would take half an hour to fill with steaming hot water, and she could just lounge in it as long as she wanted. In the half-minute idling in front of the country house, Pell let this fantasy sift through her teeth grit, with no one to mock her but herself. Then she got out of there. There was a second car already in the English's drive. Pell pulled in behind it. It looked like the eldest brother Killian's car. Pell brought the tin of cores with her and rang the front doorbell. Dahl answered. He was done up. He'd had a fresh haircut, a crisp two at the sides, the hair on top not shaved but cut unstylably close, and so sodden with product it gleamed like hot tar. The baby blue shirt he had on looked new too, the top button closed clerically at the throat, one cuff buttoned at his wrist, the sleeve of his casted arm bunched up above the now fraying and grimy cast on his wrist, the scouring bang of aftershave crawling off him like a fog. They had the new baby over, Dahl said, meaning Killian. Killian's wife Mel had been pregnant for ages. When did they have the baby? Pell asked. Dahl's eyes glazed with indistinction. Like last week, maybe? What is it? Another boy. Why didn't you tell me? I'm telling you now, Dahl said, reaching for the tinny which Pell handed over to him. He took a prompt slurp, the noise like a burst of electrical feedback, then perched the can on the outer sill of the porch window next to the door. Liverpool were playing Chelsea on the big TV in the sitting room. It was 0-0 and coming up to half-time. Killian was on the squeaking brown sofa with Mel, their older brother, Stevie, who was 4 or so. Their older boy, Stevie, who was 4 or so, was lying belly down on a rug and up on his elbows, swiping at somebody's phone. His shoes, or rather his shoe was off, his little set of kids' crutches discarded by the sofa. Stevie had got burned on the bottom of one of his feet a while back, at Killian's birthday party. Burnt bad enough to warrant a trip to the emergency room, and now, weeks later, his foot still needed fresh dressing. The foot still needed fresh dressing. Live reading, sorry for the flubs. Mel was on the sofa looking lovely, the newborn bundled up against her chest. Congratulations, Pell said. There you go, Mel said, leaning forward so Pell could see the fist-sized, vivid pink face snugged against her chest, his eyes turning very slowly onto Pell and fixing her. Hello, Pell said. What's his name? Daniel, Mel said. Another English boy in the world, Pell said. No end of English boys in the world, Killian said, nudging one of Stevie's calves with his foot. Stevie, listlessly engrossed on his iPad, flinched his leg at his father's touch. Killian looked at Pell and smiled. He was tall and dark-haired, with an intelligent, or at least a stringently watchful look to him. Whenever anyone was speaking, he would watch them for the duration of whatever they had to say. Then his head would promptly dart around to fix the next person as they, in turn, spoke. There was something off about this mannerism, though. Something performed and vaguely frantic about it. An impersonation of attentiveness by someone with no actual interest in what other people were doing or what they had to say. The other English boys sometimes referred to Killian as the fuck-up. He was the most together of the brothers in one way. He was a manager in the Ice House Hotel. He had the house and the wife and the family, but he had a knack, in his family's estimation, for blowing things up. Well, he's just a beaut, Pell said to Mel. Come in and say hello to Mother, Doll announced from the hall. Doll's mother, Sheila English, was in the kitchen, sitting in an angle to the table so the back was to the wall. The kitchen smelled of clothes drying, and there was a line strung up over the back door between the fridge and a corner of the room pegged with Doll's t-shirts and briefs and the small flags of dishcloths. Ambient noise. Sheila was drinking tea, her eyes narrowed and glimmering critically behind her reading glasses as she studied the screen of the laptop open in front of her. The laptop was an old one that used to belong to Doll, with a big diagonal crack across the screen and a growling cooling fan. Congratulations, Pell said to Sheila. For what? Sheila said, lifting her glasses from her face. Your new grandson, Pell said. Well, it had nothing to do with me, but thank you. She's been hiding out here the last while, Doll said to Pell, meaning the kitchen. The thing about being a grandparent, Sheila said, is that participation is optional. I already spent an hour in there cooing over the little man, and I will spend the rest of the night doing the same. But right now, I am taking 5 minutes to myself. You're dead right, Pell said. Or trying to, Sheila nodded at Doll, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning his chest against the frame of the door and staring in at the women. You have to watch yourself with boys, Sheila said to Pell. They get very nervous if they think you're not paying them attention. They love ignoring you. But they get very anxious if you ever have the audacity to do the same to them for so much as 5 minutes. You're talking about me, Doll asked. I'm talking about the lot of ye, Sheila said. Did you see the look in the eye of the little fella in there? She said to Pell. I did, Pell said. He's been here before, Sheila said. You can tell. If you say so, Sheila, Pell said. Where are you off to tonight? The book won't tell a thing. Keith Cannon's having a few people over, Pell said. Keith Cannon, Sheila said. Cannon, the solicitors in town, Cannon, Doll said. His kid. I know the Cannons, Sheila said. And what's happening in the Cannon house? Nothing, Doll said. I'm sure it's nothing, Sheila said. Right, that's the extract. Shambolic live performance. So I hope you enjoyed that. That's from the novel, Beyond Whenever the Fuck It's Out. I think Danielle McLaughlin is doing a reading at 9. You guys should check it out. And I know some other people have already done readings in the Holding Cell series, so please do check them out. And yeah, listen, in the meantime, everybody, I hope you're all minding yourselves, sitting tight, holding your nerve, and I'll see you all on the other side of this. Good night for now. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.